hear me fine? All right. If you can't, what's that mean? No or yes? Okay, terrific. If not, I'll have to use my speaker's corner voice. I have some of my team here. I have 3 members from my team. If they'll all stand up, go ahead. We've come up from London this morning. Hatun and Alistair and May. So if anything I say confuses you, go ask them. And they will clarify and probably tell you that much of what I say is apocryphal anyways. Nonetheless, what we do, and we are from Pfander, Center of Apologetics. You may not know what that name means. It's actually the name of Dr. Karl Pfander, who was a missionary that went to the Muslim world in the 1800s. He was German, but he went with the CMS and probably did more damage to Islam than anybody I know in that period. And more Muslims have given their lives to Jesus Christ through his writings. He wrote and did what we call polemical material. How many of you know that word polemical? Do you know what that word means? Does anybody not know what that word means? I guess most of you. Okay, let me define terms. You all have the Wolverhampton Wanderers, right? Great football team. Yeah? I'm not sitting too many nods, yes. I'm assuming it was a great football team. But you have your defense, don't you, in your great Wolverhampton Wanderers. You need defense because you need to make sure that the others don't score against your goal. And we need defense in Christianity, and that's what we call apologetics. How many of you have studied apologetics or have used apologetics? Please, Paul, you should all have your hands up because you do have to defend the faith at some time. The defense of the faith is something we all do. We're all called to do that. And in most Bible schools and in most seminaries, there are classes and there are even entire studies of apologetics. I did my master's degree on apologetics. That was what I was taught to do. I never did it on Islamic apologetics because that didn't exist. There is no such thing as Islamic apologetics. There are very few schools in the world that even claim to teach Islamic apologetics. I know of only 2, one in North Carolina and the other one in Australia. But it's not taught here in Britain. There is no school of Islamic apologetics, which is a shame because we all need to know how to defend against Islam. And I assume all of you have Muslim friends. And if you don't, then shame on you. Make sure you get Muslim friends because they're all around you here. And I've been told that you have a large block of Muslims here in Wolverhampton and Burnley and other places very close by. Now, the difficulty is since we're not teaching Islamic apologetics, much of what we're learning and much of what we're doing is done by the seat of our pants. Karl Pfander had that problem when he went to, first of all, he went into the Caucasus. He saw that there was no one there. There was no material he could use. There was no literature that he could read. And so he decided to write his own literature. He decided to do his own work. And he was thrown out of the Caucasus. He was then sent to India, and in Calcutta, he would go into the marketplaces and just preach in the marketplaces. And he found he had to use his own material. And what he did, he went back to this book here called the Quran. How many of you have read this book? Have any of you had a chance to read it? Do any of you have a copy of this? A few of you? Okay. How many of you understand this book? Well, you're better than me then, sir, because I don't understand it. And I've been studying this for 35 years. This is a book that is very difficult to understand because it gives you no context. Those of you who have read it, have you noticed? There are stories that don't begin, stories that don't end. They jump all over the place. There's nothing that's continuous. It assumes you know an awful lot before you even get into it. It's nothing like our Bible, and that's why it makes my Bible is bigger and the better, because you know which is the bigger book, the better book. It's by far the better book. Is this one you can understand, and we'll get into that as we go on. But Pfander had a hard time because he could not find anything that was written on the Quran. He couldn't find any books that had really unpacked it, that had done what we call exegesis, hermeneutics, looking and understanding it, looking back at the commentaries on it. That's called the tafsir. He found very little that was written about the model for this book, Muhammad. No one had really, in his day, had really gone and looked at the sayings of Muhammad. That's called the hadith. They had not looked at the life of Muhammad. That's called the sirah. And so he decided to do just that. that. So he was way ahead of anybody else. He was the first one really to look at the tafsir, which is the commentaries, to look at the sirah, which is the biography, to look at the hadith, which are the sayings of the Prophet Muhammad, to understand what this book was talking about and who the person behind this book, who he was, and how he modeled this book. Because Muhammad is the model for this book. Muhammad is the paradigm for this book. And if you have any doubt, ask any Muslim here in Wolverhampton. Is that not the case? So he did this way back in the 1800s, and he did 4 things. He compared the Quran with the Bible, and he compared Muhammad with Jesus. Now, when you stop and think, those are probably the 4 most important areas to do if you're going to talk with Muslims. You need to go back to the book. That's this book. That's their book. They believe this is eternal. They believe this is God-given. It has never been created. They believe that this is the same book that exists up on those eternal tablets that exist in heaven, co-eternal with God, which is already a problem because that's implying a duality. And that it was sent down over a 22-year period to a man named Muhammad between 610 and 632. And that it was then compiled completely during the time of Uthman in 650, and that this book that we have in our hand today, the Arabic part, this section here, is exactly the same that existed at the time of Uthman, that existed at the time of Muhammad, that exists up on those eternal tablets. That's what every Muslim will say if they are radical over here on the right. The nominals would say that, but they cannot support it. The liberals are starting to doubt. The liberals are starting to doubt. Now, so when you look and see what he came up across, he realized that he needed to confront this book. He realized that he needed to look at this book and compare it with this book. And when he did that, he noticed that there's quite a difference between these 2 books. How many of you have found a difference between these 2 books? Well, I've already told you one difference already. You look at this book and it doesn't say much about who the person is, the subject is. It makes the name. It doesn't give you any material to go on. It jumps you into the story. It doesn't begin the story. It doesn't end the story. There is only one complete story in the entire Quran, and that's Surah 12, the story of Joseph. That's it. What's more, it's so full of contradictions. Did Abraham go into the Kaaba, that building there in Mecca? And did he destroy the idols or did he not destroy the idols? You will find both stories exist in the Quran. You have many of these contradictions. Now, we don't have that problem in the Bible. Stories begin, stories end, do they not? And they all follow along in chronology. That's why it's so easy for you, Paul, to get up here and hold the Bible up because you know you can trust it. And I'm assuming that Paul does open the Bible in the mornings. Does he? Please say yes. Does he read it? Please say yes. Does he apply it? I hope he says. I hope you're going to say yes, because we would not trust Paul to be up here in the pulpit unless he is speaking from the Bible. And we demand this of all of our pastors. Why? Because we also follow a book. Just like Islam follows a book, so do we follow a book. All right? But how do you apply this book? Well, Paul, do you go to Moses to apply it? No. Do you go to Abraham to apply it? No. David? Billy Graham? No. Who do you go to? Jesus Christ. So we go back to a man that models this book for us. In fact, this whole book is about one man, is it not? Jesus Christ. All the Old Testament, all the prophecies point to him, where he was going to be born, how he was going to live, between who he was going to die, even where he was going to be buried. There are 300 of these prophecies in the Old Testament that point to this one man, Jesus Christ. So the model for our book is Jesus, but the book is still absolutely important. We need the book and we need the man, the book and the man, the book and the man, the book and the man. You're going to hear me say that an awful lot today because it all comes back to one book and one man. Islam starts from the exact same paradigm. Everything they've known goes back to this book. But because it's so difficult to read, as a number of you have followed, and it doesn't make sense, and it doesn't take you anywhere, it doesn't lead you anywhere, it jumps all over the place, there's no chronology. In fact, you have to know an awful lot before you even open up this book. Even the scholars, the Muslim scholars, don't understand 20% of it. 20%, a fifth of the Quran, is not understandable. We would say that about the Bible? Is there even 1% we don't understand? No, we understand all of it. Oh, we have different interpretations, and there's many different schools of theology as to when you take one verse and you context it. We were arguing in the car today. How many of us in the car were Arminian and Reformed? And I almost made the Reformers walk here because I'm Arminian. So we have that debate all the time, certainly within the church. But can you see the difficulty with this book? If it has 20% you can't even understand, what are you going to do with this book? What's going to happen to this book? What's going to happen for the man that models this book? So when you start to look and see the differences, there are enormous differences between these two books. Now, here's where Vander started something new. He decided, therefore, to go on the offense. Offense. Well, let's see. Who are you? Who is your offense in the Wolverhampton Wanderers? Well, you do have an offense, don't you? You have a defense, and they make sure that others don't score. And you need a defense, otherwise you lose the game. But you don't win the game unless you also have an offense. You need your strikers, don't you? In fact, your strikers are sometimes the most important men on the field, or women on the field. They are the ones that score against the others, and they're probably the best known players. They certainly get the highest salaries. They're the Messis. They're the Cristiano Ronaldos. Okay, they're the big names. They're the superstars of the sport. So what do? They go on the offense. That's called polemics in Christianity. When you're talking about interfaith debating, apologetics is defense. Polemics is offense. I am a polemicist. That's my area of expertise. I go on the offense. I'm not asking you to go on the offense yet. I hope all of you will in time. But if you're going to go on the offense, you need a whole different set of skills than if you're on the defense. And we can see this in football, can't you not? A defensive player has an enormous different set of skills than the offensive players. They need to be stronger. They need to be bigger. They need to be able to tackle they don't need to be as fast, but your offense better be very quick. They have to have pace. They have to have a whole different set of ball skills. In American football, it's even more divergent. If you have come to my country, in America, we have an entire team called the offense and a whole nother team called the defense. Completely two different teams because they're such different skills. And that's why in Christianity, we need to learn both skills. Now, most of us are pretty good at defending the faith. At least I hope you are. We're pretty good at defending the existence of God. Why is there suffering? The authority of Scripture. But the problem is we're not good at defending against Islam because we're not trained on how to defend against Islam. We're not trained on the questions they're throwing at you. And that's what we're going to do this afternoon. I brought Hatun Tash, who's probably one of the best we have, in fact, the best we have on our team, to do just that, to train you up and show you how you can use apologetics. Doesn't matter where you are, and in the same time, in the apologetics, how you can go on the offense. Because the best apologetic is the best defense is a good offense. Well, you've heard many people say that. That's usually always done in the context of sports. It's also as applicable in Christian mission. The best defense is a good offense. So keep them on the defense. The difficulty is there is no school of polemics at all. It doesn't exist anywhere in the world. You won't find any organization that even would delve into polemics. And the reason why, it's too dangerous to go into polemics against Islam. You will lose your life. You will get death threats. You will be harassed. Any institution that wants to go polemical is going to be targeted by Muslims. So no institution dares teach polemics. Now, I do polemics all the time. But even when I do polemics, I'm called in to do it. I'm flown in for 1 week and then I'm flown back out again. And they never advertise that I'm there. It's all done by word of mouth because they don't want the Muslims to know I've been there. So we fly in, we fly out. We fly in, we fly out. We fly in, we fly out all over the world. And that's one reason why I'm moving to America, because they need our material, because we're the only ones that both engage in apologetics and polemics simultaneously. We believe the two have to go side by side. And the reason why, just take a look at the book of Acts. Just look and see what Jesus did. Jesus used apologetics and polemics. He used them simultaneously. When Nicodemus came to him in the middle of the night, that's apologetical. He defended against what the Pharisees were saying, but he always went on the offense. Take a look at Matthew 23. The entire chapter is polemical. You hypocrites, you den of vipers, you white sepulchres, show me where Christ did not use polemics when he was there in the temple, overturning the tables. That's polemical. But probably the best person you want to go to find about apologetics and polemics is Paul. Look at Paul. Paul, who used to be Saul. Remember Saul, the Jew? Saul, the Pharisee? Saul, who belonged to the Shammah school. This is the school that went both apologetic, and they were highly polemical because they wanted to eradicate anybody that got in their way, and they wanted to eradicate certainly the Romans and to reinstigate and reinstall the Davidic kingdom. That was Saul, who belonged to that school. That was Saul, who was standing there when Stephen was being stoned to death, and he guarded the clothes of those who were stoning Stephen. That was Saul on his way to Damascus to bring back those who were there in Damascus, to bring them back in chains if need be, and kill the Christians if they resisted. That was Saul, who was met in a dynamic way on the road to Damascus by God himself and made him from Saul into Paul. Saul into Paul. Take a look at Paul and take a look at Saul. How different were they? Not very different. Paul was just as passionate as Paul as he was as Saul. Paul still went into synagogue after synagogue. Take a look at chapter 15 and chapter 17 of Acts. Read those 3 chapters and see what Paul did. Everywhere he went, whether it was in Berea, Laodicea, Cappadocia, there in Ephesus, in every city he went right into the synagogues, and he confronted the Pharisees with what they had done to the Messiah. He didn't ask any permission to go in. He just walked right in. They threw him out. Many times they threw him into jail. He got whipped in jail. In Acts chapter 19, there in Ephesus, after 3 months, they got fed up with him, so he left the synagogue and he brushed the dust off his shoes, and he went right into the lecture hall of Tyrannus. If you go into Turkey, which is where Hatti is from, go to Ephesus. You can see it today. Go and see the lecture hall of Tyrannus there. They've now uncovered it. And look at what it says in Acts 19. After spending 3 months there in the synagogue and being thrown, not really thrown out, he left of his own will. When he went to the lecture hall of Tyrannus, it says for 2 years he preached the gospel. And after 2 years, the entire land had heard the gospel. That's my Paul. So he really hadn't changed between Saul and Paul. The passion was still there. He still had the knowledge, enormous capacity to understand not only his own scriptures, but remember there in the Areopagus, when he was there in Athens, he was arguing with the Epicureans. He was arguing with the Stoics, going toe to toe with them, knowing even their philosophies better than they did. And that's why we need our Sauls who turn into Pauls today. We need to find our Pauls. And we need to find our Paulines. And that's what we're doing at Pfander Center for Apologetics. We are actually training up Pauls and Paulines. Well, okay, we don't call them that, but men and women who love to take on Islam and have no fear of the consequences. Have no fear of the consequences. What we're finding here in Britain and in Europe especially, there is a fear of Islam. How many of you people fear Islam? All of you do. And there's a pervasive fear of Islam in this country. There's a fear of Islam around Europe. There's even a fear of Islam in my country. Not as much probably as here, because we don't have as many Muslims yet. You have a lot more Muslims here than we have in America per capita. I mean, you have here in Europe per capita. But it's this fear that it's incapacitating us from moving out and actually engaging face to face. And we've got to get past that fear. And the best way I know to do that is to get to know Muslims. Find out exactly what they are like and who they are. And understand the differences between us and them. Now, I've been asked for this first hour to look at these differences. To look and see what are the differences between Islam and Christianity. Try to show you what the differences are. Then we're going to have lunch at 12:15. And then Hatti is going to come up and she's going to share with you some of the ways that you can answer their questions. And we're probably going to put you into little groups. Is that okay, Hatti, if we do that? We'll put you into groups, and she's going to actually and we're going to, those of us on our team are going to be in your groups with you to help you out. And then we're going to actually help you engage and to think like Muslims and to think like Christians, and how to engage quickly in quick and answered, how to be able to get answers out in 2 minutes. Because that's about all the time they're going to give you, we're finding. They do not give you more than that, and they will usually dominate the conversation unless you have the answer very quick. So we're going to show you how to do that this afternoon. And then I think after tea time, you've asked me to talk about slavery in Islam, a whole new subject that none of you have heard about yet, and no Muslims have heard about. Devastating material that we're coming up with. One of the ladies on our team, Sarah Foster, who is a descendant of slaves herself, and is doing this research, and it's causing huge amount of anger in the Muslim community. You'll see why. Because it's the elephant in the room that no one's talked about. And we'll have if we can have a PowerPoint, we can use that. And if you want the PowerPoint, any of you, you can have it before I leave today, this afternoon. So let's go ahead and look at the differences. Well, let's start and see what are the biggest differences. And I would suggest right at the very beginning, the biggest difference has to do with God, has to do with Jesus, has to do with the Bible, the Revelation. Let's start with those first three because they're the three biggies. And let's start and ask, how many of you, well, let me ask you a question. How many of you believe that the God in this book, the Allah in this book, is the same as the God in this book? And I would suggest you even using the name Allah in Arabic, the Allah of the Bible. So let's use the same name. The Allah of the Quran is the same as the Allah of the Bible. Is there anybody here that believes that? Oh, please, someone raise their hand. Not one of you? Okay, your son's going to raise his hand. Well, okay, then you're already converted, because almost everywhere else I go to, at least someone or two people raise their hands, because that is a new theme that is now coming in the churches here. If anybody ever says that we share the same God, and you can even do this to a Muslim, because Muslims will say that, just go up and shake their hands. Grab their hands and say, I'm so glad that you finally have admitted that the Allah of the Quran is able to come to earth and walk and talk in the cool of the day. I'm so glad you have finally admitted that the Allah of the Quran is triune. God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit. And I'm so glad that you have finally admitted that God, Allah of the Quran, died on the cross and rose again on the third day, and that He is known as the Son of God. God bless you for coming home. See what they will do. They will pull their hands out of yours if within 2 seconds say, I didn't say that. I said, yes, you did. If you say we share the same God, then let me define what my God is. All you need to say are those four things right there. Our God can enter time and space. The Islamic God is incapable of entering time and space. And if it cannot enter time and space, then their God's too small. You need a bigger God. Get a bigger God. I remember doing a debate and I've said this before, maybe you've heard it before, up in Russia. I was up there doing some teaching at the school there, and the Muslims heard I was in town, and so they had seen my YouTube videos, and they challenged me to a debate. I don't understand any Russian, so I said, you'll have to give me some translators. They said, well, fine, we'll supply you translators. I went through 3 translators, and the reason why, they said, is because I spoke so fast. I don't think I do. But the first question was this question. Allahu Akbar, Mr. Smith. God is the greatest. God is omnipotent. Please don't say that He corrupted Himself to become a man. Please don't take away His omnipotence by coming on and becoming finite man. Please don't say that. So I turned to my translator and I said, I want you to tell him right now, shame on you. Shame on you. He wouldn't do that. So I said, no, just repeat what I say. Shame on you for saying Allahu Akbar. God is the greatest. God is omnipotent, but He cannot become a man. Because saying that, you've just taken away His greatness, you've taken away His omnipotence. Don't ever say that in my presence. If God is truly omnipotent, then He can easily become a man. That's the simplest thing in the world for God to do. He created us for heaven's sakes. Don't ever say God cannot become a man. So then they came back to me and they says, are you saying that God went to the toilet? I said, yes, my God can go to the toilet, can't yours? I can go to the toilet. You mean I can do something your God can't do? That makes me greater than your God. Don't ever say that God can't go to the toilet. If He can eat, He can go to the toilet. Get a bigger God. So they kept on asking me these questions. It went for about 10 minutes. He can't eat. He can't go to the toilet. He can't take on human form. All these different questions. And finally they got to what they thought they'd hung me on. They said, are you suggesting that God can die? So I said to my translator, here you have spent 10 minutes wasting our time, telling us what God can and cannot do. Who are you to tell us what God can and cannot do? Who are you to tell God what He can and cannot do? Why don't we let God tell us if He can die? Why don't we see what God said in John 10, where the Son of Man laid down His life and took it up. And for the Son of Man can lay down His life and take it up again. Yes, my God can die. Anytime He wants, He can die. But don't leave him dead, like the Catholics have done, sitting on the cross the whole time. That's what he did on Friday, and that's the day you celebrate. Friday is your holy day. That's the day he died. But see, I celebrate Sunday. Friday's here, but Sunday's a coming. Sunday he rose from the dead, and he destroyed death. And that's why my God can die and rise again. Get the whole picture. Yes, my God can die. But in saying that, even before he died, that he can lay down his life and he can take it back again, what do you think he was saying? I am God. That's another place. They always say, where does Jesus ever say, I am God? There is a place where he's saying, I am God. Anytime God can lay down his life and take it up, he is saying, I am God. Anytime he takes on the divine names, like the Son of God, there's a divine name. Like the Messiah, there's another one. Like the Son of Man, that's the one they love the most because they believe that Jesus is saying, I'm nothing more than a man. I am the Son of Man. Without ever going back to Daniel chapter 7, verse 14. Daniel 7:14 defines it. And that's why when there in the Sanhedrin in Matthew 26, when Jesus was before Caiaphas and the chief priests, there in the Sanhedrin, take a look and see what Caiaphas was saying. Caiaphas purposely said to him, are you the Son of Man? Are you the Son of God? Are you the Messiah? Why did he ask those two questions? Because every Jew knew that the Son of Man, definite article, not a Son of Man, like you're a Son of Man, and you're a Son of Man, and you're a daughter of man, but the Son of Man, definite article, was going to be God himself. They were waiting for the Son of Man to come. And the Messiah is the one who is the anointed one. Anointed to do what? Anointed to save. See, Muslims do have the word for Messiah in the Quran. It's called Al-Masihu, the Messiah, Al-Masihu in Arabic. And Isa is given that title 11 times. Only he is given that title in the Quran, showing that they are halfway there. They've got the title, but they have no idea what it means. That's where we come in. Whenever a Muslim, and you can ask the question, what does Al-Masihu mean? Who is this person who is the Messiah in the Quran? They have no idea. And when they have no idea, what are they supposed to do? Well, the Quran gives them an answer. In Surah 10, ayah, by the way, do you know what I mean by ayah in Surah? Surah means book, ayah means verse. So whenever I say Surah and ayah, book 10, verse 94. Book 21, verse 7 says very clearly, if you have any questions, go to the people of the book. Come to us. We are the people of the book. Come to us. If you have any questions, ask us these questions. So who is this Messiah? You're supposed to believe what we say because you and us have been given the same scriptures. That's in Surah 4, ayah 135. You're not even supposed to argue with us on this. That's in Surah 29, ayah 46. Don't even argue with the Christians and the Jews, for they have been given the Tawrat and the Injil for you. There it is in your Quran. Use the Quran to help you. It's not your authority, it's their authority. But you're saying to them, if you have any question, come back to us. We'll tell you who the Messiah is. He is the anointed one, anointed to save. And how did Jesus respond to those questions? He said, you say I am. You say it. Yes, right. But he didn't stop there. The very next verse, then he then adds another title. And he starts quoting from Daniel chapter 7, verse 14. For the Son of Man will come in the clouds, and he will be from everlasting to everlasting. He'll have dominion over all tribes, nations, peoples, and tongues. We know exactly who is from everlasting to everlasting. By that definition right there, he is already saying, I am God. Because who else could be from everlasting to everlasting but God himself? Who else has dominion over all tribes, nations, peoples, and tongues but God himself? And look at the reaction of Caiaphas. He tore his robe, turned towards the Sanhedrin, and said, what further proof do we need? This man has blasphemed. And that's why Jesus was killed. Not because he was an insurrectionist, not because he was embarrassing the Pharisees. It's because he was taking on the divine titles, the Son of Man, the Son of God, the Messiah. He was daring to call himself those three. Now, to a Muslim, that means probably nothing. To us, it probably doesn't mean anything. But to a Jew, that is full of portent. And that's why we need to help our Muslim friends understand the claims Jesus was making. When you get back to Jesus and about Allah and God, then you need to go to Jesus. You need to talk about Jesus because Jesus all the way through, you're going to have problems with Jesus. And really what it comes down to, yes, we have an awful lot of difference between our God. When you look at the two gods, this God can enter time and space, this God cannot. This God is not only is able to enter time and space, he's able to walk and talk in the cool of the day. He's able to wrestle with Jacob. He comes not just in human form, he also comes in the form of a cloud during the day and a pillar of fire during the night. He also comes in the form of a burning bush. And here's where you can actually use this as a bridge for your Muslims, because that story is found twice in this book, in Surah 20 and in Surah 27. Go to Surah 20. I like to use Surah 20. Some others like to use Surah 27 better. But in Surah 20, verse 10 to 14, it's so specific there. Because in Surah 20, ask your Muslim friends to open up their Quran and read the story. There's the story of Moses. He sees a fire in the distance. He goes to investigate the fire. As he comes closer to the fire and he approaches it, the voice from within the bush says to him, "Take off your shoes, you're on holy ground." Now, ask your Muslim friend, what does that mean, it's holy ground? Can you have holy ground without God being there? Or by definition, if it's holy, is God there? See how they answer that. Ask him, is this place holy? Is there any place on earth that's holy unless God's there? They have to say it can only be holy if God's there. Because no other one can be God but God. That's the shahada right there, or half the shahada. There's only one God but God. So say, okay, so you've already admitted that God has to be there. And if you have any doubt, then go to the next 3 verses and end with verse 14. Because in verse 14, the voice within the bush says, "For truly it is Allah who is speaking to you." Now ask your Muslim friends, can anybody take on the name Allah but Allah himself? And the answer is no. God is one. No one can take on that name but God himself. So who's in that bush? Where is their holy ground? Why is it that that voice is claiming to be Allah? Is Allah in that bush? Can't be an angel. Could be the spirit of Allah. It therefore is the spirit Allah. Ooh, then you've got them in a real bind. Because if they're going to say, well, that's only the spirit there, then who's running the universe? Well, the spirit's down there, claiming to be God himself. So is the spirit God? Bingo, you've got them both ways. So is God in that bush? If God is in that bush, you can see the problems, and you can see the gears start to turn in their heads as they realize the dilemma they're in. And this is the problem. The Quran has borrowed many stories, way too many stories from the Bible. And when you borrow stories from the Bible, you better take the theology that goes with it. Because we know in the Bible that we have the same story, and that is God in that bush. That is God able to enter time and space. And if God is able to enter time and space in 1400 BC when Moses was living, then why in the world are they having a problem that God also entered time and space 2,000 years ago and spent 33 years on the earth as Jesus Christ? My God can do anything he wants. Ooh, we have a great God. We have a big God. Keep reminding this every time you're answering. Say, yes, finally, you're finally getting it. That was God in that bush. It's in the Quran, so therefore do not ever question me again whether God can enter time and space. Otherwise, you're going to have to tear that story out of your book. Be careful what you borrow. Don't ever borrow from the Bible. Our Bible is impregnated with theology. Every story is impregnated with theology. That's why it's a dangerous book. It's a lovely book because it all fits to one piece. That's why it's so good to use these bridges. Help them to come back and see that they've got a real dilemma here. They're either going to have to accept that this story did exist, that God was entering time and space. They're in 1400 BC, which means 3,400 years ago, God was on earth at one period. So why in the world can't he do it again? Don't ever question God's ability. Don't ever question his omnipotence. Please stop limiting God. Get a bigger God. We've got him. His name is Jesus Christ. Bring him home. Bring him home. Now you're going to have to talk about Jesus. Before that, Allah. Let's just talk about this name, Allah. Is Allah, the name itself, the same as Yahweh? No? What does Allah mean? Okay, but what does it mean? What's the definition for Allah? The God. That's right. It's generic. Anybody can be called Allah. And you're right, it is Nabatean. Where'd you get that from? Okay, because that's new. That's just coming out now, that we're just finding out. Allah actually is Nabatean. For those of you who don't know, the Arabic language comes from the Nabatean script. Arabic is actually a new language. There was no Arabic at the time of Moses. There was no Arabic at the time of David. Arabic really started to be formed around the 4th century AD. It was not even a script at the time of the 7th century. It was just beginning to be a script in the 7th century when the Quran supposedly was revealed. But what we do know is that Arabic comes out of the Nabatean language, and the Nabateans were about 600 miles further north, up in Petra, which was their headquarters, and that they are the ones that give us Arabic. And the god of the Petrins, the Nabateans, was Allah. That was one of his names. He's also known as Hubal. That's his formal name. But Allah is the generic name for Hubal, the formal name. And Allah means the God. What's fascinating is that Allah had a wife, Al-At, which is the feminine form of Allah, and had a daughter, Al-Manat. So not only does Allah have a wife, but he has a daughter. Supposedly, there's still some discussion on that as to whether or not we can go with that. What's fascinating is that when you look at the Quran, it's very clear in Surah 6, Ayah 102. We'll start Surah 4, Ayah 171, that God cannot have a son. Say not three, for God is one, and he has no son. That's in Surah 4, Ayah 171. In Surah 6, Ayah 101 and Ayah 102, it says very clear, for God cannot have a consort. God cannot have a wife. If he can't have a son and he can't have a wife, then why in the world did they choose the word Allah? Why did they use that name for God? Because Allah, the Nabatean Allah, had not only had a wife, Alat, but also had a son, a daughter. Which means that Allah is actually a polytheistic God, a pagan God. Why in the world, those who chose to write the Quran, why did they choose Allah? Why didn't they come back to the real name? Why didn't they come back to the name that Moses wanted? Remember, Moses wanted a name so that when he went down to Egypt, the Israelites will know which God he represented. He was scared to death about going down there. He did not feel like he was eloquent. He wanted Aaron to do everything for him, his brother. And finally, after trying to get out of going down, the 5th problem he came up with was the name. He then turned to God in Exodus chapter 3, verse 14 and 15, and he says, tell me your name. Give me your name. So when I go down to Egypt, the Israelites will know what God I represent. And what was the name that God gave him at that time? Good for you. You even know it in Hebrew. And this is Yahweh that we know today. It's just 4 letters, the Tetragrammaton. So is that the same as Allah? Absolutely not. And that's why it's fascinating, because when you find the closest that you can get in the Old Testament that I know to Allah would be Elohim, which is generic, again, Elohim, but it's plural, 3 or more. It's the first name that's given to God in Genesis 1:1, and you find it right through the Old Testament, Elohim, about 2,000 times. Adonai is a generic name, that's found about 340 times, but how many times do you find Yahweh in the Old Testament? Does anybody know the answer? It's more than 340. It's certainly a lot more than 2,000. 6,800. What is it, Hatun, exactly? Say it again. Now, she's disagreeing with me. I say 6,823, but she goes down to 5,000. 6,000. 26. Because she has more. She's found it more than we have found it. So I'll go with her. 6,836 times. That's 3 times more than what you find for Elohim, which suggests it's probably the most important name for God. And it's the one that every prophet used. Did Jesus use that name? Yes, he did. He used it in John 8:58. So if Jesus used that name and applied it to himself, and the Jews picked up stones to stone him because of that, then I would suggest that's the name we should be looking for. And since every prophet knew that name, wouldn't you suggest that the greatest of all prophets, the seal of all the prophets, should know that name? Then why did Muhammad not know that name? Why is it you cannot find that name anywhere in this book? And you can't find it anywhere in the traditions. And you certainly cannot find it in the hadith on his lips. Well, possibly because there's something wrong with this book. And that's why the other biggest difference, but let's go, before we get into the Quran, let's go and talk about Isa himself. Because what does Isa mean? Anybody know what Isa means in Arabic? Any Arabic speakers here? No Arabic speakers. Ask your Muslim friends this. Is Isa an Arabic name? No, it's not. Issa is not an Arabic word. Never has been an Arabic word. So what is the Arabic word for Jesus? Anybody know what the Arabic word for Jesus is? Good man. That's right. Yeshua. Like Yeshua in Hebrew, Yeshua has always been the name for Jesus in Arabic. The early church used Yeshua. That was the only name they ever knew. Today they use Issa because they've been dominated by Muslim cultures. And in their Muslim culture, they've had to now they have to now adopt Issa for the name. But they really should not. And that's why I think we need to go back to the original name in Arabic. And I also would like to go back to the original name in Hebrew that we use for Yahweh. I'd like to take Lord out of my Bible, because in my Bible, Yahweh is L-O-R-D in capital letters. And I just watched a documentary 2 days ago about the House of Lords. Did you watch that? All those doddering lords that are coming in on their Zimmer frames, most of them were senile. They didn't even know what they were voting for, but they had to bring him in just to get the vote. That's who our God is? That's not my God. My God looks nothing like that. And I would like to get away from the word Lord, because that confuses an awful lot of Muslims. They think that our Lord is nothing more than what we see in the House of Lords here in Britain. And I'd like to get back to the original name. Because when Moses asked God, what is your name? And he gave him his name. What did he say in the very next verse, in verse 15? And this shall be my name from generation to generation. This shall be my name forever. This should be his name today. Because right now, folks, we're having a real problem with Allah. And there are many churches and there are many translating bodies that would like to take Yahweh out and replace it with Allah. They would like to take Son of God out and replace it with representative. They would like to take Son of God out and replace it with Messiah. They would like to take any filial language. Are you hearing about this? This is happening all over the Muslim world, and it's happening here in Britain as well. Wycliffe translators are doing it. They're part of the problem. We're trying to stop them. We've asked them to stop doing this, to replacing any filial language, any God the Father, God the Son, taking out any father and sonhood and replacing it with Arabic names, or what they believe are not Arabic. They believe they're Arabic. They're not Arabic names. They're Quranic names. Issa is a Quranic name for Jesus. It is not an Arabic name for Jesus. Allah is also a Quranic name for Jesus. It was imported by the Quran. It was adopted by the Quran. It was then introduced by the Quran, and that's why it has now become the Arabic name for God today. And that's unfortunately why in the Arabic Bible we now use Allah. And I think we need to get rid of Allah. Just get rid of him, because I don't want anything to do with Allah. Allah bothers me to no end. Take a look at the God in this book. This God is incapable of coming to earth. This God is incapable of dying on the cross. This God is incapable of loving anybody. He has no idea of having a relationship with me, is incapable of facing me face to face. He is incapable of allowing me to answer my prayers. And more than that, he is deceitful God. He takes the image of Jesus, puts it on another man's face, and lets that man die in his place, and then doesn't tell anybody for 600 years. And then tells a seeming Arab man who cannot read or write that actually it's wrong. For 600 years we've been wrong. That was not Jesus on the cross. That was another man. What kind of God is that? Not my God, and not a God I see in this book. And that's why we need to reject the God that I see here. I want nothing to do with Allah. He is not my God. Nor do I want much to do with Issa, because take a look at Issa in this book. What do you see about Issa here? Well, he spends much of his time as a child telling his mother where to eat in Surah 19, how to shake the tree so they can get. How come Mary cannot figure that out? Talking to the people because they don't know who he is, and he speaks from the cradle, and then he takes some mud, fashions it into clay, blows on them, and they are made into birds. Is that in your Bible? I don't see any of those stories in my Bible. So where do these stories come from? In Surah 3, Ayah 49. In Surah 3, Ayah 46. Where do these stories come from? Not from the Bible. Every one of them comes from apocryphal writings. These are these Christian sectarian writings that were proliferated all right down there in the Middle East, that had come down into the Arabian Peninsula, primarily had come into places like Iraq, where much of the Quran was created. They were borrowed and put into the Quran, and that's why almost all the stories you see in the Quran about Moses and about Abraham in Mecca, I had no idea Abraham was living in Mecca. Did you know he lived in Mecca? Did you know that he went to the Kaaba and destroyed all the idols there? My Abraham in this book was 600 miles further north. He never, ever went down to Mecca. And more than that, as we're now finding out, there was no Mecca in existence in 1900 BC. So this book is full of borrowings, many of them sectarian borrowings. Many of them are apocryphal writings, Jewish apocryphal writings. Let me give you some examples. Surah 5, ayah 31 and 32, the story of Cain and Abel. That story comes straight out of the Targum of Jonathan ben Uzziah, written in the 2nd century AD, incorporated into the Quran in probably the 7th, 8th, or 9th century. Surah 5, ayah 32, which everybody loves to quote. All the Muslims love to quote. He who takes the blood of one, O children of Israel, he who takes the blood of one, it's if he takes the blood of all. He who saves the blood of one, it's if he saves the blood of all. Have you heard that quoted by Obama, by David Cameron, by every pundit? They all love to quote that verse without looking and asking where that verse comes from. It should not be in the Quran, because it was incorporated into the story of Jonathan ben Uzziah, which is written in the 2nd century. By the time it got to the 5th century, a scribe reading this story starts to think about the blood of Abel and writes in the margin with his own pen, he who takes the blood of one, he takes the blood of all. He who saves the blood of one, saves the blood of all. He's talking about basically the blood of Abel. By the time that was then rewritten in the 5th century in what they call the Bar Sanhedrin, chapter 4, verse 5, both those stories, the story of Cain and Abel and the raven, along with the analogy of the blood of Abel, was then incorporated into the same story in the Bar Sanhedrin in the 5th century. That means we know who wrote it, we know when it was written, we know how it was written. It has nothing to do with Islam, it has to do with Jews. The beginning of the verse, O children of Israel, it should show you this has nothing to do with Islam. They borrowed the story like they did earlier, like I noticed earlier with the story of Moses in the burning bush. Surah 21, ayah 51 to 71 is a story of Abraham that I was referring to earlier. That story was taken straight out of the Mishnah of Rabbah, another Jewish apocryphal account written in the 2nd century. Surah 27, ayah 17 to 44 is the story of Esther, but it's not Esther, sorry. It's the story of Solomon. Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. It's a great story. It's a story I wish I had when I was in Sunday school. One of the most vivid stories in the Quran. There is Solomon marching his birds, getting them ready for battle. And then one day he notices as he's marching the birds, the first Air Force ever invented there by Solomon, he's missing one bird, his favorite bird, the hoopoe bird. It's called that. It's called hoopoe, hoopoe, and that's why it's called the hoopoe bird. This hoopoe bird is missing, and he gets angry, and then he sees it flying in from the south. It lands at his feet, and it talks to him. I had no idea that Solomon could talk to birds, but according to the Quran, he can. And he asks the bird where he's been. He said, well, I've been down in the south of this great kingdom ruled by this beautiful queen called Sheba, Queen of Sheba. And so Solomon said, well, go down and bring her up so I can meet her. So the hoopoe bird flaps on back down to Sheba, lands at the foot of in front of the Queen of Sheba, and talks to the Queen of Sheba. Evidently, she can talk to birds too. This is something we've lost over the years. So she talks to this bird. This bird says, you've got to come up north to meet this great king. So she comes up to his palace. She comes in through the throne room and comes through the door of the throne room. Solomon's sitting here at the throne. And as she's coming to meet him, in the middle of the throne room is a pond. So she believes she's going to get her dresses wet, so she picks up her skirt to keep the dresses from getting wet. And that's where the story ends in verse 44. How many of you have heard this story before? No? You've heard it. You know everything. You can probably get up here and do it better than I can. This story is in Surah 27, ayah 17 to 44. Have you heard it in Sunday school? Man, I miss out on this. This is a great story. How come I never grew up with this story? And the reason's very simple. The reason we've never heard it is because it's not in the Bible, because it comes from the Targum of Queen Esther, the Targum of Esther, the second Targum of Esther, written in the 2nd century. It was written by Jews in the diaspora for their children. It was nothing more than a bedtime story for the children, incorporating biblical names with the stories that they were hearing in the diaspora. And that's why the Arabs heard it, because it was recounted in Arabic. That's why they thought that this was the authentic account, and they incorporated it into the Quran. See, the Quran is full of these stories, these apocryphal accounts. And that's why I want nothing to do with this book, including what it does to Jesus. And that's why in this book, it says that Jesus did not die on the cross, but that's just one verse. Surah 4, ayah 157. There are other verses that contradict it. In Surah 19, Ayah 33, Jesus as a baby. Remember, he still is a baby. He's there in the cradle. He's speaking of the baby. And they're saying, what are you doing here? And he tells them, blessed be me the day I was born, the day I die, and the day I rise again. He as a baby is talking about the fact he's going to die and rise again. That completely contradicts Surah 4, Ayah 157. Ask Muslims what they're going to do with that. Well, they'll say, well, that's a future event. He's talking about when he's going to come the second time. The second time he's going to come in the second coming. No, it does not. He's talking about his death and resurrection. That's why I'm so glad I don't have to defend this book. It's so full of contradiction. But it contradicts my Lord Jesus at the worst point. It takes him off the cross, puts another man in his place, which means we're all damned. And because of that, I don't want anything to do with this Jesus. Even the word Isa is the wrong name. We pretty much now know where Isa comes from. All these stories that I've been recounting about Jesus there making birds out of clay, telling his mother how to get her own food, speaking to the wise people there in the village and talking about the fact that he's going to die and rise. All these stories come from these sectarian writings. Much of them come out of the Nag Hammadi Gospels. They were all written in Syriac. So when you borrow the story, you also borrow the name of Jesus, because the name of Jesus in Syriac is Iesu. And when you take Iesu and put it into Arabic, it comes from Iesu to Isa. This is the Syriac Jesus. This is basically a Gnostic Jesus. This is not my Jesus. This is a heretical Jesus. No wonder I don't recognize him. That's why I don't want you to use this book. Stay away from this book. Because what this book does to Jesus is reprehensible. What it does to women is reprehensible. Just take a look and see what this book does to women. And if you have any doubt, just look at 7 verses. Surah 4, Ayah 3, Surah 4, Ayah 11, Surah 4, Ayah 24, Surah 4, Ayah 34, Surah 2, Ayah 282, Surah 2, Ayah 223, and Surah 2, Ayah 230. That's 8 verses. I've given you one extra. 8 verses. Take a look at what it does to women in just those 8 verses. And ask your Muslim friends, those you women, ask your female friends, why is it that in Surah 4, Ayah 3, that a man can have up to 4 wives, 2, 3, or 4, and yet a woman is not allowed to have more than one husband? I don't think you'd want more than one husband. One's hard enough as it is. Remember, with each one of us comes a mother-in-law. But can you imagine, up to 4 wives shows you already there's inequality in marriage. In verse 11, it says that a woman, if a father dies, the girl gets half the inheritance of her brother. So it's inequality in death. Half the inheritance of the brother. In verse 24, it says that a man can, he says, be careful of those who, he's talking about marriage, and he says you can marry any one of those, and then he talks about those which your right hand possesseth, which in Arabic means a slave of war, which means you can enslave as many women as you want, according to verse 24, who are not your wives, but if you get a child through them, they have the same rights as your wife. So above and beyond the 4 wives, you can have as many slaves of war, female slaves of war. And in verse 34, it says, if a woman disobeys you, admonish her first. If that doesn't work, throw her from the bed. If that doesn't work, beat her. Daraba. Daraba in Arabic means to scourge her. Now, it doesn't matter how Muslims try to defend that verse, and they try to do so, even in the Arabic here, what they have done in the translation, they've put in parentheses, lightly. How do you beat a wife lightly? I've never beaten my wife at all, but I don't understand how anybody can beat their wives lightly. And yet there it is in the Quran. They can beat them. Now can you understand why in certain battered women's homes here in this country, 95% of the women in battered women's homes are Muslim? The number 1 reason for divorce, of women trying to get divorce, is because they're battered, is they're beaten. Well, the Quran allows them to do it. And 95% of them are sent back home again because that is not considered a legitimate reason to be divorced. Remember, men can divorce their wives simply by saying 3 times, I divorce you. Talak, talak, talak. That's all they have to say. You don't even have to have a witness. But according to Surah 2, Ayah 230, if after the 3rd time you divorce your wife, men, and then the next morning you wake up and you realize what a great wife she was, you're in anger because she did something wrong, she burned the food, you divorce her. The next morning you realize, I shouldn't have done that. You cannot have her back, according to Surah 2, Ayah 230, until she marries another man, consummates that marriage with the other man. That other man has to divorce her, and only then can you have her back. If you doubt me, just read it. It's right there in Surah 2, Ayah 230. So many Muslims I've said this, that you're just making it up. I said, then you read it for yourself. It's as clear as day in the Quran. In Surah 2, Ayah 230, it says that a woman is a tilth for her husband, which means a man can go and plow his wife anytime he wants sexually. That's called marital rape in this country. And yet they have all the right to do so, according to Surah 2, Ayah 223. In Surah 2, Ayah 280, it says that a woman gets half the testimony in court as a man. Why should she get half the testimony in court as a man? Aisha, the favorite wife of Muhammad, asked Muhammad this, according to the traditions, and his response was, because women are more disobedient and less intelligent. How many of you women think that you're less intelligent than we are? Maybe in the 7th century you probably came across that way because you had no opportunities. But not in the 21st century. Not in Britain. Not today. Girls outperform boys in every category. By the time of standardized testing in high school, and by the time you get to university, 70% of your graduates are women. So you cannot tell me today that women are less intelligent. You better not come back to this book. You better come on back to this book. Ooh, I love this book. See, this book helps me with women. I love what it does with women. Take a look and see what Jesus did with women here. Remember Mary and Martha? There was Martha in the kitchen. Mary was at the feet of Jesus. And Martha says, come back to the kitchen. What does Jesus say? No, Martha, you head on back there. Mary, you stay right at my feet. Here was a rabbi allowing a woman to sit at his feet. That stood 1,000 years of tradition on its head. No Jewish rabbi would allow a woman to sit at his feet, and yet Jesus did that. What a model for today. When you want to talk about equality, just take a look at Galatians 3:28. For there is no difference between man or woman, Jew or Greek, slave or free. All are equal in Jesus Christ. Ooh, I love my Bible. 1 Corinthians 7. Take a look at the whole context of marriage. The whole chapter is on marriage. And what does it say? A woman's body is equal to a man's body. You cannot rape your wife. Sorry, we're not allowed to. No, in fact, we're just to do the opposite. Ephesians chapter 5, verse 25. Ooh, I love that. Because Christ compares the church to a husband and a wife. And he says, just as Christ was willing and to love the church, so a husband should love his wife. And as Christ was willing to die for the church, so a husband should be willing to die for his wife. What a corrective to Surah 4, Ayah 24, Surah 4, Ayah 3, Surah 4, Ayah 34. Right there, context. Look at the context and see what Christ did. And remember the testimony of a woman. Take a look at the greatest event in the whole history of mankind, the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. On the resurrection of Jesus Christ, who did he show himself first to? Not to his disciples. There was Peter and John. They ran to the tomb. He wasn't even there. They never saw him. You would have thought that he would have shown himself to the disciples, right? No, he showed himself to a woman first. An evil woman. That's my Jesus. And the second time he showed himself was to a group of women on the way to Bethany, even knowing that in first century Judaism, the testimony of a woman is half of that of a man. Jesus purposely wanted the women to be the first to testify of his resurrection. That's why I love Jesus. He corrects what the Quran mistakes. And when you take a look at these two books, just take a look and see what we're now finding out about this book. Now, Hutton has done an amazing survey research that's just come to light on looking at the Arabic Qurans. Muslims will say that this book can only be read in Arabic, and that's probably true for them. It is only Arabic because their God can only speak one language. I'm so glad my book can be read in every language on earth. 2,500 languages has now been translated. If you want to get a universal God, why don't you come back to the Bible? If you want a God that only speaks one language, you better come back to the Quran. Get a bigger God, we've got him. But they still stipulate he can only be understood in Arabic. Now, if that is the case, and they will say over and over again that this book was sent down to Muhammad over between 610 and 632, this book was compiled in the time of 650, and that it has not changed. Not one letter has changed, not one word has changed, not one sentence has changed, not even the diacritical marks have changed. That's the dots above and below the line. And you need to have dots in it because if you look in Arabic, any of you who speak Arabic, if you just get a little smiley face, that could be 5 different letters. If you put a dot above it, it's a na. If you put 2 dots above it, it's a ta. If you put 3 dots above it, it's a tha. If you put a dot below it, it's a ba. If you put 2 dots below it, it's a ya. Na, ta, tha, ba, ya. Which is it? You need those dots. Otherwise, it could be any word. And if you get three of them together, three of those curly faces, three of those smiley faces together, and you put dots above below the line, you can get up to 19 different words depending on where the dots are. Can you see the problem? So what they're saying is this book can be read anywhere all over the world. It's the only uncorrupted book. And all the Arabic Qurans all over the world are exactly the same. Well, Hatun, in the last 2 years, has gone around the world and has asked friends to buy up Arabic Qurans for her because she has found that you can find up to 27 different Qurans in Arabic today in the Arabic-speaking world. You have now found how many thousand? 45,000. 45,329, and that's what she's just found up to date. This has never been heard of before. We introduced this back in July of this year at Speaker's Corner. We had to have bodyguards because they were, if you can go up and watch it, go up on Fander Films and take a look and see how they reacted. The Muslims have never heard this before. They had no idea that there was more than one Quran. They assumed that there were thousands. They assumed there was only one Quran. They had no idea that we have found 27 different Qurans, all in Arabic. These are not translations. These are Arabic Qurans. And that we've already found 45,300 differences between them. And that's just with the 23 you've looked at. There's still many more to find. More than that, when you look at the differences, and we've just finished filming, we've done now 14 segments in a professional studio to look at these differences. This is all going up on Al Hayat television. They're going to beam it down to around 220 million Muslims. This will be the first time they've ever seen this or heard about this. We looked at the differences, and we looked side by side. We have the Hafs over here, we have the Warsh over here, and we looked at the verses right next to each other so that anybody, even anybody here, none of you speak Arabic, none of you have read Arabic, you can see the difference visually. We circled the letters to show you the difference, and then we looked at the translation of the different verses to show you how it changes the translation. Just not only with one or two letters, just words get changed. Enormous differences, theologically speaking. This has never been done before. This is all going to be beamed up. It's going to have a huge reaction from the Muslims. They're going to get angry because they've been told a lie their whole lives. And then we're doing the next segment, we're now looking at the earliest manuscripts. The earliest manuscripts of the Quran, there are 6 major manuscripts. 6 of the earliest manuscripts, the Topkapi, which is in the Topkapi Museum there in Istanbul in Turkey, the Samarkand, which is in Tashkent in Uzbekistan, the Husseini manuscript, which is in Cairo in Egypt, the Ma'il Quran, which is here in London in the British Library. We've seen that one we know quite a bit about. The Petropolitanus manuscript, which is in the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris, and then the Sana manuscript, which is in Yemen. These are the 6 major Muslim Quranic manuscripts. Now, we have always been told that these 6 major manuscripts all come from the time of Uthman, mid-7th century, that they're all complete, and that every one of them agree, and that they all agree with the Quran we have today. In 2002, 2 Turkish scholars, Dr. Tayal Atakulic and Dr. Ekmeluddin Sanlu, I know I'm mispronouncing it, that's why Hatun is smiling. These 2 Muslim scholars were given authority to look at these 6 manuscripts for 5 years. And they were the first ones to look at all 6 of them and do forensic testing on them. They took 5 years to do that. They finished in 2007. They wrote up their report in 2009. And in 2013, it was translated into English. So we got a hold of it. And I did a debate in 2014 in Toronto. You can go up online. The classic debate with myself and Dr. Shabir Ali. We debated this in September of 2014. And I just introduced these 6 manuscripts to him. And I said, take a look at them, and you will see that not one of these manuscripts is from the 7th century. Dr. Altakalic and Ekmeluddin Sanlu, both of them dated the Topkapi to the mid-8th century. They dated to the Sana manuscript to the early 8th century. This is the earliest, 705. They dated the Ma'il to the first half of this 8th century. They dated the Husseini manuscript to the 9th century. Same with the Samarkand, possibly the late 8th or early 9th century. The Petropolitanus manuscript is to the early 8th century. You notice not one of them is from the 7th century. Not one of them was from the century that Muhammad lived. What's more, not one of them was complete. The best one is the Topkapi in the Topkapi Museum there in Istanbul, and it was about 78% complete. But they found 2,270 manuscript variants. That means words in that manuscript that do not parallel the Hafs Quran that we have in our hand today. This Hafs Quran actually is dated back to 805, 9th century. That's what we think. What's interesting is they could not find any two manuscripts that were alike. Every one of them was different. The Samarkand manuscript, which is supposed to be complete, is only 43% of the Quran. The Ma'il, again, is only 43. Only goes up to Surah 43 in the Quran. There's 114 surahs. The same with the the Ma'il manuscript that we have here in London. As they looked at these manuscripts, they realized not one of them came from the time of Uthman, not one of them came from the 7th century. They started to appear in the 8th century. They did not agree with each other, and most disturbing, not one of them agreed completely with the Quran that we have in our hand today. So when was this book canonized? When was it finalized? Do any of you know the date? 1924. Good man. 1924 was when this book was finally canonized. That's 93 years ago. I turned towards Shabbat Ali in our debate and I said, you know, Prince Philip is older than your Quran. I said, if it was canonized in the last century, and yet for 1400 years you've had all these manuscripts at your disposal, you could have put together a critical edition. You have never done a critical edition of the Quran. There has been no critical edition of the Quran. It doesn't exist. We're the first to do it. And that's why I said, I will now say, and I said it at the debate in 2014, I said, if this book does not come from the 7th century, if it does not come from Uthman, if it does not come from Muhammad, then who is Muhammad and what's his purpose? Now, Shabir got pretty angry when he heard that, and I said, listen, we're putting the gauntlet down. You haven't even heard what we now know about Muhammad. That's the next debate. He has yet to allow me to do a debate with him. He will not debate the next debate. Because what we now know about Muhammad, we don't even have time to tell you. It gets even worse. But folks, can you see? See, we've done this work on our Bible. All these questions we've already answered. Back in the 1800s, when we had historical criticism with Wellhausen came out there in the school in Tübingen, and we had source criticism, redacted criticism, literary criticism, they all start counting, filing, and one after another. By 1905, it decimated the church along with Darwinianism, and the church has never recovered here in Europe. We then went and found answers to every one of these criticisms. So we pretty well know how to answer the documentary hypothesis, how to do and look at redacted criticism. With source criticism, we know exactly about source criticism, and you British have the best institution on earth, the British Museum. We have put together an entire tour of the British Museum just looking at the Bible in the British Museum. We'd love to take you on it. You'll be so encouraged to see how much of the Bible is in your museum. You all stole it, brought it here, put it into one building so we could look at it. God bless you for doing that, because had you not stolen it, all that material would be lost. And yet it shows how great our Bible is. You do a comparative between these two books. This book falls to pieces on almost every area of criticism. This book has yet to find, we cannot find one artifact anywhere in the world that controverts a properly understood biblical statement. There's not one artifact that controverts a properly understood biblical statement. What a book we've got. But what a man we've got. The book and the man, the book and the man. Folks, we're going to leave it there. I see it's time for lunch, and Hatud's going like this. We've got to stop. There's probably a lot of questions. What we're going to do is have lunch now, okay? And then we're going to come back after lunch, and then Hatud's going to come up here, and we're going to start applying how to ask questions and how to answer questions and how to get you engaged with Muslims so you don't have any fear about them.